Today I will be replacing the bearings and the flywheel on this Casablanca Four Seasons ceiling fan. This particular one is from 1989. Surprise, surprise. And the flywheel is barely hanging on. It's hard as a rock, and if you look closely, you can see some of the rubber arms are already broken. So these are the tools I'll be using here. I got the new flywheel and the new bearings. And the only unfortunate part about this one is that this old flywheel is 4 and 5 blade. The new flywheel is 5 blade only, because that's the only one I had. Other than that, I got these Allen keys here. I'll only be using one. Got some needle nose pliers, regular pliers, hammer, a mallet, a steel pipe, safety glasses for when we hammer the new bearings in, wire strippers, Phillips and flathead screwdriver. Got the bearing puller, and I have this socket wrench here just for the bearing puller. And by the way, this was 30 bucks at AutoZone, if you're wondering where that came from. I have this socket here for removing the down rod. This is 5/16. This one right here is another 5/16, but it's actually a little bit wider, and the only reason I'm using this is to punch out the shaft for the switch housing. This one's 11/16. This is just when we pull the bearing. I'll demonstrate that shortly. But yeah, this flywheel is moments away from breaking, and the bearings sound terrible. I'll go ahead and show that real quick. Turn it on speed 3. So yeah, they sound like crap. Also, I'm going to be removing the light kit altogether on this fan because I don't think this light kit looks very nice on Four Seasons. That's just my opinion. So I'm just going to remove that altogether, so when we're done this, it'll just have the switch cap. So yeah, I'm going to get started with this. Alright, so I'm going to start by removing the light kit. We're going to open up the switch housing. Just the 2 flathead screws on the bottom. That just pops right off. And this is also very dusty. I never cleaned this yet. So we're just gonna undo those wires and take the light kit off. All right, now that the light kit is off, I'm gonna go ahead and take the down rod off. Just these 3 screws on the top. And just pull the wires through and put it aside. All right, now this is what we're left with. I'm going to take the motor housing apart now. On this fan, it just uses 3 screws. Others use more, but it's just these screws on the outer part of the housing. And then there's a nut on the other side of all of them, right here. I like to just thread them together so I don't lose anything. All right, and that's that. Now I'm going to open the motor housing, and we're going to see how gross it is in there, since I never cleaned it. It's actually not as bad as I thought it would be. It's pretty gross, pretty dusty, but I was expecting it to be worse. It usually is. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top plate off, top of the motor housing. It's just these 4 nuts around here. When you get the nut off, it's just 4 of these little clips. And that'll just come right off. And now these 2 wires that go down through the shaft there, we're just going to pull those through. Those are the light kit wires. Also, when you're doing this, don't mix up the light kit wires and the main lead wires. So make sure you don't mix those up. What is this? I just got some paper in there for whatever reason. Now you want to remove that little retainer ring right there. So this one, what I do is I just take the flathead screwdriver, stick it in there, and it just pops right out. Sometimes they like to put up a fight, but this one was pretty simple. And then now I'm going to take this 5/16 socket. It really doesn't matter the size you use. It's just the width of the socket that matters. I'll show it the best I can here. Just push some of these wires out of the way. It has to be pretty much the same diameter of the shaft here in the middle, because you have to be very careful when you hammer this out. It cannot mushroom the shaft here, otherwise you're pretty screwed. There are ways you can get around that if it does happen, but just don't do that. So I'm gonna actually, before I do that, I'm gonna remove the IntelliTouch board. And to remove the board is just unplug this ribbon cable here, and then you unplug this plug right here. So I'll do that. I'll be right back. All right, I just adjusted the camera, so hopefully you can see it a little better. But after you get these 2 plugs unplugged, be extremely careful when you do that. You don't want to break it. There's a little screw here, and there's a little screw here. You don't have to take them out, you just have to loosen them. So just loosen that. Then we'll loosen that one. And then because this board has been here for so many years, sometimes it'll seize together with that BFR, so you just kind of have to wiggle it. Carefully, it'll come loose. And just like that, it comes out. I'm going to clean this off real quick. I'm also going to clean the rest of this motor and the housing. And what I do to clean that is I just have a air compressor that I use and just blast everything out, since this is all just loose dust. This fan was installed in the bedroom. It's not like it was in a kitchen or anything, and it's all greasy, so that's pretty much that. So now for the next part, I'm actually not going to worry about cleaning this until later. But you want to lay this down on the table. You don't want to lay this on the BFR. It's the BFR, which is that orange band, is very, very delicate. You don't want to break that or damage it. So you want to lay it down on this section of the motor where there's no BFR. Just want to lay it down like that. I'm going to turn it this way so you can see it. But we're just going to basically hammer this shaft out right here. So I'm just going to use this socket and I'm going to use a hammer. Just going to have to push these wires out of the way. And of course this doesn't want to stay still, so just walk with me here. I think you get the point. I'll be right back after I get that shaft out. Now the switch housing is removed. That took me a few minutes, so I wasn't going to film all that. But you basically just hammer it until it comes out. And now this is what we're left with. Just the motor and flywheel pretty much. So I'm going to take my Allen key here. And there's a screw, Allen screw right there in the flywheel. You just want to get it in there. Loosen that screw. You don't have to take it all the way out, you just have to loosen it. And this one is pretty stuck on there. It actually just came off. Well, what you can do, if the flywheel is stuck and you can't pull it off by hand, you just take two flathead screwdrivers like this. You can just pry it off. Like that pretty much. If the flywheel were to be stuck. And there it is. Now look what I'm going to do. Crunch. I'm going to crunch this thing. Oh, there it goes. Man, this thing is tough. I don't know why I just did that. And there you go. Now it crunched. That was kind of dumb. But I think it's always satisfying to do that for whatever reason. It's going in the trash anyway, so it doesn't matter. Now you got the motor. And to get to the bearings, you just have to take these 4 screws out. And there's a nut on the other side of them. So we're just going to remove those. And then just come out like that. So I'll be right back after I remove those screws. Okay, we got all 4 screws out. And now you want to remove the bottom plate of the motor here. So what we're going to do now is just take a flat screwdriver and a hammer. And we're just going to get the end of it here and just carefully hammer this. We're going to do this side now, and I'm going to state this again. Be very careful, do not damage this BFR. The BFR is responsible for speeds 1 through 5. So if you break the BFR, speeds 1 through 5 will not work. So just be extremely careful. All right. Now that bottom plate just came loose. Now I can just pull that off. As you can see, this thing is disgusting. It's full of dust. So I'm gonna go ahead and blast this out with compressed air. All right, I just went ahead and cleaned this off. I'm gonna put that aside, and we're gonna take the rotor out. Just pops right out. Wouldn't hurt to go ahead and clean this as well. I'll do that after I get the bearings out. So now this is what you're left with. So now to pull these bearings, you're gonna need the bearing puller, of course. You're gonna have to, this is what I do. Other people might have other ways, but I take this socket right here, which is the 11/16. I take this socket adapter thing and just plop it right inside. Just place that right on top of the rotor there. And then put your bearing puller on top of that. Now when you do this, you have to have something that is one solid piece. It can't have a hole in the middle of it. Even if it's a small hole, the bearing puller is going to try to get through that, and you're going to have a very hard time pulling the bearing out. So just put that in there. Put it on top, and then just kind of loosen this and get it into place. And get the 3 claws there underneath of the bearing. Kind of have to mess with it here and just get it in place. I hope you can see what I'm doing. I can't really see the camera right now. And then just kind of hand tighten it, get it in place. And then I'll take this socket wrench here, and we're just gonna pull that bearing out. A lot of times what I do, I can just twist it like this. It's just easier this way. And just kind of do that until the bearing comes out. All right, now the bearing is most of the way out. I'll just demonstrate it the rest of the way. And there you go. Just comes right off. And there's the old nasty bearing. And then you're going to do the same for the other side. Just get the socket on there. Put this inside of that. And just kind of get the bearing puller in place and pull that bearing off. And there you go. Both bearings are removed. I'm going to go ahead and clean this off, and we'll go from there. Alright, so I'm doing this part on the floor because now we're going to be hammering the new bearings on. There's the rotor there, got our new bearings. We got the steel pipe, the hammer, and then just for safety reasons, I'm just going to wear safety glasses for this. So always do the one on the longer part first. Always do that one first, because you're resting the other side of the shaft here, and if you do this first, that bearing will be on there. And then when you hammer this one on, it can damage that bearing. So you always just want to do that one first. Just kind of place it on there. Give it a couple light taps to kind of start it. And then you just put this on here and hammer it down. And I hate when this happens, but sometimes the little shield piece pops off. But that's okay, because you can just pop it right back on. Doesn't really matter. And you pretty much just hammer this down until it stops. You'll feel the bearing hit this little ring here, and that's when you know it's on all the way. Alright, I just got the first bearing on. Now I'm going to put the second bearing on the bottom now. When you're doing this, you want to be very careful that you don't hammer this little shield piece and damage that. It's very important, so be very careful when you do that. That's why I'm kind of going slowly here. I just don't want this to slip and hit that piece there. And that's it. The bearings are on. And when you're doing this on a solid concrete floor and you're hammering these bearings on, when you get the bearing all the way on, this will actually bounce on the floor slightly. So that's why I really like to do this on a concrete floor. All right, now we're ready to put the rotor back into the motor. And in here is this little piece right here, this little ring. It's very important you don't lose that. That just goes right in there. So just make sure you don't lose that. And then the bearing just kind of sits right in that little hole there. Just plop it right in there. Sometimes you may have to give it a little tap with a hammer, but this time it just went right in. And then we'll be ready to put this little cover piece back on. All right, now I'm ready to put the cover piece back on. And you can see it's got all these little holes on the ends here. The screws go through the middle holes. And then you want to line that up with the holes on the bottom of the motor. And then when I'm about right here, I like to just put these in. So that way I can get it exactly lined up. Then what I'll end up doing is I'll just thread each of these nuts on the bottom of the screws. And the reason I do that is because we have to hammer this bottom faceplate thing back on. This part right here. And the reason I'm not tightening these screws, I'm just threading them in, I'm just starting them in. And the reason I put them in is because when we hammer this back on, I don't want this top hole to not be lined up with the bottom hole, and this helps just kind of keep it all lined up. All right, so now I just got all the screws threaded back in. You can still see this plate here is loose. And when you're lining the screws up and putting them in, you want to, again, you do want to put those nuts in there and thread those on, because when you hammer this back on, the screws will want to bounce out. So now that we got there, we just kind of give it some light taps. Just go all the way around. And that's all there is to putting that back on. You just got to tighten up the screws now. So I'll just go ahead and tighten these all up, and just tighten all 4 of them. And when you tighten these up, you don't want to have all of them loose and then tighten one like all the way. You just want to go around each one. Kind of just tighten each one, go around like this. And then now once they're kind of tight now, and then now I can tighten each one. That one's tight. Go the one across from that. Sometimes you might have to use a socket to hold the nut on the other end. But I don't have to do that in this case. I just kind of have my finger on it, and it's working for this one. That's tight. I'll do this one. That's tight, and then now this is the last one right here. And there you go, it's tight. Now you just want to spin this rotor and make sure everything is spinning properly and freely. And now we're ready to put our new flywheel on. All right, got the new flywheel. This flywheel isn't new, obviously. This is from a fan I parted out. But you can still buy these new. You want to line this up. In this case, it's going to be that top hole right there. Just kind of get it on there. And then once you have it lined up, you can go ahead and tighten that screw up. Make sure it's tight. Don't over tighten it, but just make sure it's tight. And there you go. There's the new flywheel. Now we're ready to put the switch housing back on. I'm going to go ahead and clean that off real quick. I'm just going to blow some compressed air on that, so I'll be right back. And just like that, the dust is gone. Just kind of stick that back in there. And when you do this, let me show it real quick. You can see that hole in there. This top part here just lines up with that. Stick that back in, start it by hand. Then as soon as you feel it catch on, that's when we'll be ready to take the mallet and hammer this back on. And when you do this, you want to be very careful. Do not hit the edges, because you can crack these and break these. You just want to hit that center part there. And you can see it's not in all the way yet. I'm gonna do this on the floor because all this crap over here is gonna fall off the table if I keep doing this, so I'll be right back. All right, that part is done now, and you know it's in all the way because you can see it come through the top there. And then now we're ready to install this retaining clip. A lot of times these break. You can get these new. In fact, I'm going to put a link in the description where you can buy these. A lot of people don't like to reuse them, but I like to reuse them. As long as you don't break it, you can reuse it. Just kind of start it by hand. And then when you get it around that there, I just like to take a screwdriver, push down on all the ends. Sometimes it can be stubborn, it won't go in all the way. Just kind of have to work at it. And there you go, now it's in all the way. And that's what it should look like right there. And then now you're going to take your light kit wires, which in this case are these two. You're just going to feed them back down through the shaft there. Just like that. Now we're ready to put the motor housing back together. So I already blew these off with compressed air, but what I like to do before I put them back on, I'll just take a Clorox wipe and just wipe the surface down. Because the compressed air got all of the loose crap off, but now it's still dirty though, so just wipe that down. And then followed by that, just use a paper towel. Just feed the two wires through here. And for now, we're just doing the top part of the motor housing. Before we do the rest, we're going to put the board back in. It's honestly a better idea to do the board first, but it doesn't really matter. We're just going to put these little clips back on. I'm just kind of putting them in there like so. And I'm just putting these nuts back on. Just threading them in by hand. I'm not tightening them yet. I'm just starting them in. Then now, once all four of them are on, you can tighten them up. The threads in these are very thin, so you got to be very careful not to over tighten those, because you can very easily over tighten them and strip the threads. So when you feel them start to get tight, that's it. Don't try to tighten it anymore. And that's it. I'm going to put the board back in. I also blew this off with compressed air. It still looks dirty, but it got all the loose crap off, because this board does accumulate a lot of dust over the years. Just gonna, you can see where the screws were before on those bottom slots on the ends there. Just gonna line them up with those two screws. Find my screwdriver here. All right. Just kind of line those up. Like I said, I should have put the board on first, but whatever. When you get the board in place, just tighten those screws up. Again, don't over tighten. And then plug your ribbon cable back in, and then plug in this harness here. So the ribbon cable just plugs in right back here. I don't know how well you can see that. Just be very careful plugging that back in, because the ribbon cable can break very easily. And then after that, just take this orange wire harness and just plug that back in. Until it just goes into place. And sometimes, it didn't happen this time, but that little white clip that the orange plug goes onto can break sometimes. If that does break, just don't worry about it. It'll still be fine. It'll work just fine, because the plastic gets so brittle over time. It didn't break this time, but more often than not, they do. Doesn't really matter. And then now we're going to put the rest of the housing back on. But first, the side band here, you can see the little piece of tape that holds it together is just kind of falling off. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove that the rest of the way. And I'm going to put a new piece of tape on there to hold it together. So just peel that off. I'm going to just take a Clorox wipe the surface there so the new piece of tape can stick better. I'm going to just take some blue painter's tape. Take a piece off. And then just line it up and stick the new piece of tape on there. Just like that. It doesn't hurt to put two on there. All right, so what I did now is I just put two pieces of tape on there. Now we're going to take the bottom faceplate and the side band. We're just going to get the side band in these little notches right here. You can see there's like a notch on the edge of the faceplate. Just line it up. Get your 3 screws ready. And then just going to put the housing back on. I always line it up on the faceplate first, and then it'll just go right into place. And there it goes. Now just line up the hole there with the top hole and just feed your screws in. Now all 3 screws are in and tight. Now you just want to look around the side band here in the motor housing. Just look around the whole thing and make sure the side band didn't like slip out of one of the notches, which it didn't, so we're good. And make sure that little, where the side band goes together, make sure that's nice and closed up. You don't want a gaping hole there or anything. Now, because this will have no light kit now, I'm just gonna cut these wires, cut the ends there. And then we're just gonna cap them off. So just put those wire nuts on there. I'm also gonna cut these wires, the lead wires, because we're gonna restrip those so we can get nice clean wire strippings off of there. And we're gonna reinstall the down rod. And what I like to do, you can see this little screw in there. Just take the Allen key there. I just like to make sure that's tight, because that does come loose over time. And then now you can feed the wires through the down rod. This down rod's a bit narrow, so it can be kind of a pain. Just do one at a time. All right, there's one. And this is actually where the needle nose pliers can come in handy. So here I have these really tiny needle nose pliers. Stick that through. May take a few tries. Oh man, almost. You know what? It is a good idea to strip this first. So that way the strip part of the wire can actually go through there. So you're not just trying to jam the insulation through there. There it goes. Now I can just take the pliers, grab onto that, and there it is. Line that up with these holes on top of the motor there, and you can put these 3 bolts back in. Just start them by hand. And then you can just tighten them down the rest of the way with this socket. Make sure those are nice and tight. It holds the down rod on, so that's kind of important. And then you can, if you can look closely here, there's some dust on those, on the heads there of those bolts. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just literally gonna take a paintbrush and just brush that dust off. Also, make sure that ground wire is tight. You can see there's a slotted screw there. And this one's actually quite loose. All right, there you go. It's tight now. All I did was tighten that slotted screw there. And now we're just left with the open switch housing there. So here's the light kit that I no longer want on this fan. I'm I'm gonna take the switch cap off. I'm gonna clean that out real quick. Now that is cleaned, it's a tiny bit scratched, but it's not that big of a deal. It's nothing. Just there's these two holes, and then there's these two notches. Just make sure they're lined up properly. And then just go ahead and put those two slotted screws back in that you took out at the beginning. Okay. Now that one's trying to cross thread. There you go. And there you go. And then now I'm just take a Clorox wipe and I'm just gonna wipe down the fan here, because there are some dirt stains on here. When you're done using a Clorox wipe, always follow that with and wipe it down with a paper towel, just a dry paper towel. A lot of people will say not to use Clorox wipes on fans because it can ruin the finish. It's got bleach in it and whatnot, but it doesn't hurt it. I've done this with countless fans. Pretty much every fan in my collection has been wiped down with Clorox wipes. And as long as you wipe it off with paper towel, it's perfectly fine, and it works really well. It also won't hurt to wipe down this top part of the down rod too, just to get all that nasty crap off of there. And then now the last thing we're going to do before plugging it in and testing it, I actually have one of these spare thingies laying around, and all this does is just plugs up that hole there. This switch cap is threaded in the middle there, so that just goes in there. You don't have to tighten that very much at all, just until it stops. It's very important that this screwdriver does not skip on that thing there, because otherwise it's going to look crappy. But now we're ready to plug it in and test it. So I have here this IntelliTouch control, this W11 that came with it. Now here's something that I find kind of weird about these W11s. You have line and load. And in the electrical industry, line is always power coming in, and the load is whatever it's feeding. But for some reason, I don't know if all W11s are like this, but I know a lot of them that I have, where it says load is where you hook up your power, and line goes to the fan. So I find that kind of weird, but that's what we're gonna do. This is my testing cord that I use here. It's got these little alligator clamps on the end. Supposed to roll all over the place. Good grief. Alright, this thing will not stay still. God, I'm gonna have to make it stay still. Alright. All right, now I'm ready to plug it in and test it. I just have the neutral hooked up to the fan, the hot going into the controller, and that just going to the fan. And then I have a few of my tools here just holding the fan in place so it doesn't roll off the damn table. So now I'm gonna go ahead and plug this in. Now that's gonna freaking fall off the table now. I had this separating those wires so the hot and the neutral don't touch. Damn it. All right, we're gonna go ahead and turn this thing on now. So I'm gonna do demo mode. Power, and then fan, light, fan, light, fan. So now we'll let this cycle through demo mode just to make sure everything's functioning properly. You can hook up a light to make sure the light works, but I already tested that before I did any of this stuff, so I know that works. Then it stops on speed 3, so you know the BFR survived. And this is just vibration noise that you hear. But the bearings are now silent. Now it reverses. And there you go. And you can also just like turn it on whatever speed. This is speed 2. Just make sure everything works as it should. And it does. And now the job is done. Fan runs quiet. Flywheel is nice and flexible. Fan's nice and clean. And I know some other people have done bearing replacement videos and flywheel replacement videos and whatnot, but I figured I'd just do my own. Hope this helps some people out. And there you go. We have just replaced the bearings and the flywheel in a Casablanca 4 Seasons fan.